You are standing at the edge of the known world. Behind you lies everything your people have ever known. Every story, every hunting ground, every grave. Ahead of you, there is only cold. A vast, treeless plain stretching to a white horizon where, as far as anyone knows, no human foot has ever fallen. The wind comes off it like a blade, and something in you, some restless, stubborn thing, decides to walk into it anyway. That decision, repeated over generations, is one of the most astonishing things our species has ever done. Because beyond that frozen plain lay not just new land, but two entire continents, North and South America, empty of people. An entire half of the planet never touched by a single human being. The peopling of the Americas was the last great migration in human history, the moment we finished spreading across the earth. And our ancestors pulled it off by walking and paddling straight into a frozen new world. So how did they do it? How did warm-blooded tropical apes cross into a continent guarded by ice and cold? The answer overturns almost everything you were probably taught in school, and it is far stranger and more beautiful than a simple walk across a bridge. Let's start with the bridge itself, because that word is the first thing we have to fix. During the last ice age, an enormous amount of the planet's water was locked up in mile-thick glaciers, with so much water frozen onto the land. Sea levels dropped by around 120 meters, nearly 400 feet. And when the sea pulled back, it exposed the floor of what is now the Bering Strait, the narrow stretch of ocean between Siberia and Alaska. The land that emerged has a name. Scientists call it Beringia. And here is the first myth to throw out. Beringia was not a narrow, icy bridge that people sprinted across. It was a vast, cold, dry grassland hundreds of miles wide from north to south. A whole sunken world that was not covered in ice at all. Mammoths grazed there. Bison, horses, and saga antelope roamed it. This frozen-sounding place was actually a living steppe, a cold grassland teeming with the giant animals that Ice Age hunters depended on. And that changes the whole story, because people did not simply pass through Beringia, they lived there. This is where one of the most important ideas in the field comes in, supported by genetics, and it is called the Beringian standstill hypothesis. When researchers studied the DNA of Native Americans and their Siberian relatives, they found something they did not expect. The ancestors of all Native Americans appear to have split off from their Asian relatives, and then become genetically isolated, stewing in their own separate gene pool for thousands of years, perhaps as long as 10,000 years, before they ever reached the Americas proper. Where were they all that time? The leading answer is that they were stranded in the middle in Beringia itself, hemmed in. To the west, harsh conditions. To the east, a colossal wall of ice. So they waited. For millennia, this land bridge was not a bridge they crossed. It was a homeland they lived in. An entire lost human chapter playing out on a continent that is now underwater. So what finally let them in? For decades, the textbook answer was a feature called the Ice-Free Corridor. The idea was that two giant ice sheets covered Canada, and as the climate warmed, a narrow gap opened up between them, an inland passage running down through the middle of the continent. The first Americans, the story went, marched single file down this corridor and burst out onto the Great Plains. And the people they became had a name too. The Clovis culture, identified by their beautiful, distinctive fluted stone spear points, dated to around 13,000 years ago. For most of the 20th century, this was gospel. It even had a slogan. Clovis First. The Clovis people were the first Americans, full stop. Except they weren't, and the evidence that shattered that idea is some of the most dramatic in all of archaeology. Travel to the far south of Chile, thousands of miles from that supposed corridor, to a waterlogged site called Monte Verde. There, the archaeologist Tom Dillihay excavated the remains of a settlement, preserved wooden tools, hearths, even chewed medicinal plants. That turned out to be over 14,000 years old, older than Clovis, and impossibly far south. If people were already living at the bottom of South America before the Clovis hunters supposedly entered North America, then the whole timeline was broken. Clovis was not first. Someone had come before. Monte Verde was fought over bitterly for years, but it held, and it cracked the old story wide open. And then The timeline broke even further. In the gypsum flats of White Sands, New Mexico, a team led by researcher Matthew Bennett found something heart-stopping: fossilized human footprints pressed into the mud of an ancient lakeshore. Children and teenagers walking alongside the tracks of giant ground sloths and mammoths. And when they dated the seeds embedded in those footprints, the result was staggering. The prints were somewhere around 21 to 23,000 years old. That is not just before Clovis. That is during the absolute peak of the last ice age. The last glacial maximum, the coldest, iciest moment of all, thousands of years before that inland corridor was even open. Real human children were walking across what is now the American Southwest, while the great ice sheets were still at their height. So if the famous inland corridor was sealed shut by ice when those footprints were made, how did people get south of the glaciers? This is where the second great revolution in the story comes in, and it points not to the land, but to the sea. It is called the Kelp Highway hypothesis, championed by the archaeologist John Erlandson. The idea is elegant. Even when the interior of the continent was locked behind ice, the Pacific coastline was not. And that coast was lined with kelp forests, vast underwater jungles of seaweed that shelter fish, seals, otters, shellfish, and seabirds. A coastline like that is a moving feast, so instead of marching down a frozen corridor, the first Americans may have hugged the shore in boats, hopping from one rich pocket of coast to the next, paddling their way south along a green highway of kelp long before the land route ever opened. The cruel irony is that almost all the evidence for this would now lie underwater, drowned by the same rising seas that erased Beringia. So let's reconstruct what one of these moments might truly have felt like. You are in a small skin boat, low in the cold gray water, your family huddled around you. To your left, a wall of blue, white glacier calves into the sea with a crack like thunder. But just ahead, the water is alive. A raft of kelp rocks on the swell, and beneath it you can see the dark shapes of fish and the slick roll of a seal. You have never seen this stretch of coast before. No one you know has. Every headland you round is a place no human has ever laid eyes on. You are not conquering anything. You are just following the food, and the food keeps leading you south, into warmth, into a world with no other people in it at all. You do not know you are making history. You are simply trying to feed your children one more day. Now here is the twist that pulls the whole story together, and it overturns the heroic image most of us grew up with. There was no single brave moment of crossing a bridge into a new world. The famous land bridge was not a bridge at all. It was a homeland where people lived for thousands of years. The first Americans were not the Clovis hunters of the textbooks. They were people who came earlier by routes we are still uncovering, quite possibly by sea. And we now have a genetic ghost to prove how layered this story is. In Alaska, the analysis of an infant's remains, an individual sometimes called the Upward Sun River child, studied by the geneticist Esk Willerslev and his colleagues, revealed an entirely distinct population, the ancient Beringians, a branch of the family that stayed behind in the north while others pushed south, a lost lineage no one even knew existed. The peopling of the Americas was not one heroic march. It was a slow, patient, multi-generational unfolding, a story of people waiting, adapting, and quietly following the edge of a living world, which leaves you with a strange reflection. Every single indigenous person of the Americas, and a great many people alive today, descends from those first travelers, the ones who stood at the edge of the ice wall and decided that the unknown was worth the cold. The same restless impulse that pushed a small band of humans into an empty hemisphere is the one that later carried us across oceans and eventually off the planet entirely. We are, all of us, the descendants of the ones who looked at a frozen, terrifying horizon and chose to find out what was on the other side. You are standing at the edge of the known world, with everything you have ever known behind you and only cold ahead. The wind cuts. The plain is empty, and you take the first step anyway, not knowing that on the far side of all, that ice waits an entire, untouched half of the earth, and that 10,000 years from now, a whole world of your descendants will look back and wonder how you ever found the courage to walk into the white.